The 2025-2026 epidemiological season in Argentina has reached a critical threshold, with public health authorities reporting what is now categorized as the most severe hantavirus outbreak in the country in over a decade. Data released by the Argentine Ministry of Health as of early May 2026 confirms 101 laboratory-verified cases of hantavirus infection, resulting in 32 fatalities. This places the case fatality rate at approximately 31.6%, a figure that has remained consistently high throughout the season. The geographic spread of the virus is notably broad, with infections documented across multiple provinces including Buenos Aires, Salta, Santa Fe, Chubut, Rio Negro, Entre Rios, and Jujuy. While hantavirus is endemic to these regions, officials note that case counts have exceeded the epidemic threshold for the majority of the current season. Since January 1, 2026 alone, 42 new infections have been recorded, signalling an intensification of transmission during the Southern Hemisphere's autumn months. Plus one hantavirus belongs to the Bunyavirales order and is characterized by its tri-segmented, single-stranded RNA structure. In South America, the primary clinical manifestation is hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS, a severe and often fatal respiratory disease. The current spike in cases has been attributed to a combination of environmental and ecological factors, including significant rodent population increases, often colloquially referred to as a rodent boom, driven by climate shifts and habitat disruption. This surge in the rodent reservoir, specifically the long-tailed pygmy rice rat known as Oligorhizomes longicordatus, has increased the frequency of human-rodent intersections. The highest incidence of infection during this cycle has been observed among men aged 20 to 49, with a particularly high mortality rate identified in the 20 to 29 age bracket. Public health surveillance indicates that many of these cases originate in rural or semi-rural settings where agricultural work or cleaning of previously dormant structures facilitates exposure to infected rodent excreta. Plus 3. The framing of this outbreak has shifted from a localized regional concern to an international priority, following the identification of a cluster of cases linked to global travel. Unlike many other strains of hantavirus found in North America or Europe, the Andes virus strain prevalent in Argentina carries the unique and documented risk of person-to-person transmission. This biological characteristic necessitates a more aggressive public health response and enhanced contact tracing protocols compared to other hantaviruses like the Sin Nombre virus or the Pumala virus. As domestic case numbers continue to rise, the Pan American Health Organization has highlighted that Argentina currently holds the highest number of hantavirus infections in the Americas for this period. The severity of the symptoms, which typically progress from non-specific flu-like aches to rapid-onset respiratory failure and cardiovascular shock, underscores why international health agencies are closely monitoring the trajectory of the Argentine outbreak. The situation remains fluid as winter approaches, a time when rodent populations traditionally seek shelter in human-occupied structures, potentially further increasing the risk of aerosolized transmission in enclosed spaces. The international dimension of the Argentine hantavirus outbreak intensified in May 2026, with a cluster of infections identified aboard the cruise ship MV Hondius. The vessel, which departed from Ushuaia, Argentina, on April 1, 2026, carried 147 passengers and crew members from 23 different countries. According to reports from the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a cluster of severe acute respiratory illness emerged as the ship traveled through the South Atlantic toward the Canary Islands. As of May 8, 2026, 8 cases have been identified within this cluster, including 6 laboratory-confirmed and 2 probable cases. The outbreak resulted in 3 deaths, with the index case involving an adult male who had spent more than 3 months traveling through Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay prior to boarding. This individual developed symptoms on April 6 and died 5 days later while the ship was at sea. Plus 4 laboratory testing conducted by international reference labs has confirmed the presence of the Andes virus, or ANDV, in these patients. This finding is significant because the Andes virus is the only hantavirus strain known to be capable of spreading between humans. While such transmission is rare and generally requires close, prolonged contact with a symptomatic individual, the confined environment of a cruise ship presented a unique set of challenges for public health officials. The CDC sent specialised teams to meet the vessel in the Canary Islands following its arrival from Cape Verde to assess exposure risks among passengers and implement monitoring measures. The World Health Organization's international health regulations focal points have been supporting international contact tracing for individuals who disembarked at various ports of call, including Antarctica, South Georgia Island, and St. Helena, before the outbreak was officially recognized. +2 core developments in the clinical understanding of this cluster show a symptom onset range from April 6 to April 28, characterized by fever and gastrointestinal distress, followed by a rapid progression to pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome. In Argentina, provincial health ministries, particularly in Salta, have bolstered their laboratory and diagnostic infrastructure to manage the influx of suspected cases. In Salta alone, 12 confirmed cases and 50 suspected cases were investigated in the first 10 weeks of the year, with the majority concentrated in the Oran department. These provincial reports contrast with broader national data showing localized hotspots where ecological conditions favor high viral loads in rodent populations. Health agencies are currently focusing on distinguishing between primary environmental exposure, where individuals breathe in aerosolized droppings, and secondary person-to-person transmission. The current working hypothesis remains that the initial cases in the cruise ship cluster acquired the infection through environmental exposure in Argentina, but the possibility of subsequent transmission between passengers is the subject of ongoing epidemiological investigation. Prevention and public health guidance for hantavirus rely heavily on environmental management and the disruption of transmission pathways. Because hantaviruses are primarily spread through the inhalation of aerosols containing the saliva, urine, or feces of infected rodents. The Argentine Ministry of Health and international bodies like the CDC emphasize strict protocols for cleaning and habitation. The colilargo rat, the primary reservoir for the Andes virus, often infests barns, sheds, and homes that have been sealed for long periods. Public health officials advise that such spaces must be ventilated for at least 30 minutes before entry. Most critically, authorities warn against dry sweeping or vacuuming in areas where rodent activity is suspected, as these actions launch viral particles into the air where they can be easily inhaled. Instead, a wet cleaning method is mandated, involving the use of a disinfectant solution, typically 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, to thoroughly soak droppings and nesting materials before they are removed with gloves. +3. The limits of current medical science present a significant challenge in managing the outbreak. There is currently no specific antiviral treatment, cure, or vaccine for hantavirus infection. Clinical management is limited to early supportive care, which includes intensive care monitoring, mechanical ventilation, and fluid management to address respiratory and cardiovascular failure. Because the incubation period can range from a few days up to 60 days, surveillance remains difficult. Health departments in Salta and other affected provinces are reinforcing the need for early clinical recognition, as delayed hospitalization significantly reduces the chances of survival for those who develop hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Travelers to endemic regions are advised to avoid contact with rodents, secure food in rodent-proof containers, and stay in accommodations that are well-maintained and free of pest activity. +4 public health experts and virologists continue to monitor the intersection of climate change and rodent population dynamics, as warmer winters and altered rainfall patterns can lead to the masting of certain plants, providing the food surplus that triggers these rodent booms. The honest limit of current knowledge lies in predicting the exact duration and peak of these cycles. While the situation in Argentina is being managed through increased surveillance and international cooperation, the risk remains a persistent reality for rural workers and travellers in South American endemic zones. The emphasis remains on education and environmental sanitation as the primary defences against a virus that remains difficult to detect in its early stages. Authorities continue to update guidelines as more data from the 2025-2026 season becomes available. ensuring that the global health community is prepared for both environmental and rare person-to-person transmission events. For more updates on global health reporting and disease surveillance, consider subscribing to this channel. The institutional response to the escalating rodent population and the subsequent rise in hantavirus cases has centered on the coordination between the Argentine Ministry of Health and the National Administration of Laboratories and Institutes of Health, commonly known as ANDV Malbrán. In Buenos Aires, the Malbrán Institute serves as the primary diagnostic and research hub, tasked with the genetic sequencing of viral strains to determine if the current outbreak involves a mutation of the Andes orthohantavirus. Lab technicians utilize molecular biology techniques, specifically reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, or RT-PCR, to detect the viral genome in blood and tissue samples. Surveillance also involves serological testing, such as enzyme-linked immunosorbent assays, ELISA, to identify IgM and IgG antibodies, which indicate recent or past exposure to the virus. These diagnostic efforts are critical for distinguishing hantavirus pulmonary syndrome from other respiratory illnesses, such as influenza or pneumonia, which may present with similar early symptoms including fever, myalgia, and gastrointestinal distress. Local hospitals in the affected provinces of Chubut, Rio Negro, and Salta have activated emergency protocols to manage the influx of suspected cases. Clinical reports from these facilities emphasize the rapid progression of the disease. Patients typically enter a prodromal phase of 3 to 7 days before experiencing a sudden onset of respiratory distress and cardiovascular collapse. Because there is no specific vaccine or highly effective antiviral treatment for hantavirus, hospital management remains strictly supportive. This involves the use of intensive care units, mechanical ventilation, and careful fluid management to prevent pulmonary edema. Medical officials have noted that the survival rate is significantly higher when patients are transferred to tertiary care centers at the first sign of respiratory symptoms. The surge in cases has placed a visible strain on regional healthcare logistics, necessitating the stockpiling of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers who may be exposed during high-risk procedures, such as intubation. Regarding the claims of a looming global pandemic, public health agencies are carefully contrasting tabloid alarmism with verified epidemiological data. While the rodent war headlines suggest an unprecedented global threat, virologists point out that the Andes virus is unique among hantaviruses for its documented ability to transmit from person to person. However, verified data indicates that such transmission typically requires close, prolonged contact, often within a household or through shared intimate spaces. The World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization maintain that while the potential for clusters exists, as seen in the 2018-2019 Apuyen outbreak, the virus does not currently possess the characteristics for efficient, sustained human-to-human spread on a global scale. Surveillance of shipping and international trade is focused primarily on preventing the inadvertent transport of infected rodents or contaminated materials. Though the risk of the virus surviving long transit times outside of a living host is considered low by environmental health experts, scientific surveillance has also expanded into the field, with environmental agencies monitoring the retarder or massive seeding events of the bamboo species Jujuy-The, which often triggers these rodent population explosions. Biologists are conducting trapping lines to estimate the density of the Oligorhizomes longicordatus, the long-tailed pygmy rice rat. By testing the prevalence of the virus within these captured populations, labs can provide early warning data to nearby communities. This intersection of ecological monitoring and laboratory science is the backbone of the current containment strategy. Health officials are also tracking the spatial distribution of cases to see if the virus is moving into more urbanized areas where human-rodent contact is more frequent. The disparity between the confirmed case numbers and the sensationalized media reports is a point of concern for officials, who emphasize that while the situation is a serious regional public health emergency, the primary transmission route remains environmental rather than a new airborne pandemic vector. Public health guidance regarding the current hantavirus surge in Argentina and neighboring regions emphasizes a rigorous protocol for environmental remediation and personal protection. Because the Andes virus is primarily transmitted through the inhalation of microscopic particles from rodent excreta, the Argentine Ministry of Health has issued specific mandates for cleaning potentially infested areas. The primary directive is to avoid any activity that aerosolizes dust, such as dry sweeping, shaking rugs, or using leaf blowers in enclosed spaces like sheds, barns, or cabins that have been vacant. Instead, officials instruct the public to ventilate these spaces for at least 30 to 60 minutes before entry. Once ventilated, all surfaces must be saturated with a disinfectant solution, typically a mixture of 1 part commercial bleach to 9 or 10 parts water. This wet cleaning method ensures that viral particles remain trapped in the liquid and are neutralized before they can be wiped away. These measures are critical in rural and semi-rural settings where the long-tailed pygmy rice rat, or colilargo, is known to nest for individuals residing in or travelling to endemic zones. Practical takeaways extend to food security and waste management. Health agencies advise storing all grains, pet food, and human provisions in heavy-duty plastic or metal containers with tight-fitting lids to eliminate attractants for rodent reservoirs. Furthermore, the maintenance of a buffer zone around residential structures is recommended, which involves clearing tall grass, weeds, and wood piles for at least 30 metres around the perimeter of the home to reduce rodent harbourage. In regions experiencing the ratada, the mass flowering of bamboo that provides a sudden abundance of food for rodents, these preventive measures are considered the only effective line of defence. Public health surveillance remains high stakes, as officials monitor the density of these rodent populations through systematic trapping and testing to provide early warnings to local communities. The limits of current medical knowledge and technology form a significant part of the ongoing public health challenge. Despite decades of research, there is currently no specific antiviral therapy or vaccine approved for Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. The medical community remains reliant on early clinical suspicion and rapid transfer to intensive care units for supportive treatment, including mechanical ventilation and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, in the most severe cases. The long incubation period of the virus, ranging from a few days to 8 weeks, creates a difficult window for epidemiological tracking, as patients may not recall the specific exposure event that occurred nearly 2 months prior. Furthermore, while the Andes virus strain is unique for its capacity for person-to-person transmission, the exact biological triggers that allow this specific strain to move between humans, while others do not, remain an area of intense study. In closing, the response to the 2025-2026 hantavirus outbreak requires a balance between heightened vigilance and the avoidance of unfounded panic. While the case fatality rate remains a grave concern for health officials, the transmission of the virus is largely preventable through adherence to established sanitation protocols. The ethical responsibility of public health reporting in this context is to provide clear, actionable data that empowers at-risk populations without resorting to the sensationalism often seen in tabloid coverage. As the Southern Hemisphere moves through its seasonal shifts, surveillance teams